Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. In this video, we're going to be speaking about the two different schools of grammar in the Arabic language. So a lot of people are quite surprised to learn that there are actually two different schools of grammar in the Arabic language, just like there are four different schools of jurisprudence. So the two different schools of grammar is what we're going to be speaking about in this video. Pretty much we're going to be speaking about the historical development of both these schools very briefly. Then also we're going to be speaking about the difference between these two schools in just a general overlook. And finally, we're going to pretty much answer the question, which is, what exactly is the grammar that we study today? When you read books like Qatar and Nada bin Hisham, or read books like Al-Fiqh bin Malik, what is the grammar that we're studying in these books? Is it the school of Basra? Is it the school of Kufa? What is it? So let's start. The two schools of grammar are the school of Ahl al-Basra and the school of Ahl al-Kufa. So Ahl al-Basra are called al-Basriyun and Ahl al-Kufa are called al-Kufiyun. Now al-Basra and al-Kufa are both cities. They're both cities that are in what is presently called Iraq. They're in what is presently called Iraq. So Basra is closer to the Kuwaiti border and Kufa is more towards the center. Now, what's the difference between these two schools in a very brief sense? Ahl al-Basra, their approach is prescriptive. So their goal is to prescribe rules of grammar. This is the rule for this is the rule of that. This is more what the school of Basra was about. Now, the school of Kufa, even though, of course, they had their own rules and they were about also laying down rules, that being said, their approach was more descriptive. It was more about describing and, writing down and recording the speech of the Arabs, but not necessarily to prescribe rules as much. And we're going to see examples and proof for that. So let's start with the school of Basra, because the school of Basra is the oldest school. So Ahl al-Basra, the prescriptive school, if you will, okay, the study of the Arabic grammar began during the time of the Tabi'un with Abu Aswad al-Du'ali in the city of Basra. So Basra, as you can see, is in the bottom here, so close to the Iranian border. And obviously Kuwait would be somewhere around down here. So that is where Basra is. So Abu Aswad al-Du'ali is the one who really founded and really started the science of grammar, and he was in Basra. And it was done according to the order of Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu, but there are varying narrations according to why exactly did he start studying, or did he start codifying, if you will, the Arabic language and Arabic grammar. There are many different varying views on this and varying narrations, but they all agree in the sense that Abu Aswad ad-Du'ali is the one who started it. As far as the reasoning behind it, who ordered him to do it, there are varying different narrations that Suyuti mentions in its book, and we're going to mention that in a second. So the study of Arabic grammar began during the time of the Tabi'un, with Abu Aswad al-Du'ali in the city of Basra, and according to one narration, it was by the order of Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu. So the school of Basra started studying this with the scholar, and other scholars came. So the science of grammar flourished in Basra for the following century with scholars like Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq, Isa ibn Umar al-Thaqafi, and Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, and Sibawayh, the famous Sibawayh, whose real name was Umar ibn Uthman. So as you can see, there was a long line of scholars that came from Basra. They all added to the study of grammar. They all added their own opinions, and they all grew and helped the science of grammar flourish. So the science of grammar was not all established by one person. Abu Aswad al-Du'ali is the one who started it, rahmatullahi alayhi, and he's the one who really founded a lot of the principles. But for example, Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi added a lot of what we understand nowadays. And of course, Sibawayh came after, and he's considered arguably the greatest grammarian. Now, it's important to understand, though, that Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, which is the one who is the one who founded the study of Tajweed, he's also the one who founded the study of Urud, Arabic prosody. He's also the one who really did a lot of really added a lot to the science of grammar. And he's also the first scholar to write a dictionary in Arabic language, and which is actually the first dictionary for any language in the world, Kitab al-Ayn. So Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, even though he came many years after Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, his contributions are huge. And he's one of the main teachers, if not the main teacher, of Sibawayh. And Sibawayh, in his book Al-Kitab, he mentions Khalid ibn Ahmed more than, I think, 200 times. He mentions him a lot. And a lot of the opinions that Sibawayh takes are really the opinions of Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi. Because Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, even though he had a vast knowledge of grammar and taught it to his students, first and foremost Sibawayh, that being said, he didn't actually write down his opinions. So Sibawayh is the one who actually came and really wrote down the opinions of Khalil ibn Ahmed and added to it from his own opinions, and also added from other scholars that he studied from, and that's how we get Kitab al-Ayn, or that's how we get Sibawayh's book Al-Kitab, which is really the main book in grammar that we usually go back to. If not, if you can say it's the first grammar book in Arabic, and talking about the rules of grammar and so on and so forth. So Sibawayh, of course, is a great scholar, but it's important to understand Sibawayh, at the end of the day, did stand on the shoulder of giants, first and foremost Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi and others, not to say and not take away from the contributions that Umar ibn Uthman gave. So these are the scholars that we consider the scholars of Basra. There are others, but these are really some of the major ones. So these names are names that anybody who wants to really study grammar should have a very good understanding. We're going to be talking about Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq in a second, as we're going to see. So this is the school of Basra, okay? Now, you might be asking yourself, how exactly did they study the Arabic language? How exactly was grammar studied? And this can pretty much be broken down into these two different points. So these different scholars that we just talked about, what they would do is that they would actually listen and document the speech of the Arabs. And they obviously use the Quran, of course, as another source. And of varying opinions, but we can also add a hadith there, but that's another issue. So they would go to, for example, the desert. Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, for example, went to the desert for years and years and years. He spent in the desert, writing down and studying, empirical study, if you will, of the Arab speaking their language, right? When they would be speaking, what they would be doing, how would it sound like, right? What are the ending of the words, right? So they'd be listening and they'd be documenting this speech. Once they would document it, they would find certain things. For example, that the word Muhammad, when it comes at the beginning of the sentence, it always ends with Dhamma, Muhammadun. So then after that, they would do a ta'alil. A ta'alil is justification. They say, okay, why is it that Muhammad, every single time it comes at the beginning of the sentence, it has a Dhamma at the end? They'll say the reason why is because it's the subject. And the subject needs to be marfu'. And that's the third step, which is qiyas. After they've done a justification for why the Arabs say it like this and not like that, the reason is this, that's the justification. Then after that, they'll do qiyas, meaning what they say, based on this, any word that is also like Muhammad is also going to take the dhamma ending or the marfu' ending, if you will. So they listen to the speech, then they justify why are certain things in certain ways, then finally they do qiyas. Finally, they would do analogy, and they would apply this justification to all words that would be in a similar position. Just an example and a proof for this. We have a historical anecdote here of Abdullah ibn Ishaq. We just covered who Abdullah ibn Ishaq is. To make it very simple and not to go into too much details, this narration mentions that Ibn Abi Ishaq was asked something, was asked a question by someone. قلت له, he was asked pretty much, هل يقول أحد الصويق يعني السويق? This great scholar, Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq, he was asked, do any Arabs say the word sawiq, sawiq, with a sad, instead of sawiq? قال, he answered, Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq answered by saying, نعم, yes. Amr ibn Tamim, the tribe of Ibn Tamim, تقولها, they say it like this. They say instead of sawiq, they say sawiq, with a sad. But then, this is an important point. Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq said, وما تريد إلى هذا? And what do you want from this? And from this question, what are you trying to get? Why? Because عليك بباب النحو يضطر وينقاس. He said what you should be focusing on when it comes to grammar are things that are general and that can be generalized. So yes, this specific tribe right here they say this word sawiq, but all the other tribes that we take the Arabic language from, all the other tribes that are fusaha, they say it sawiq. So we're going to follow the general way, and we're going to take and derive our ruling, our qiyas, and analogy from what the general Arabs say. So we're going to say that the way to say the word sawiq is with a sin, not with a sad. Even though there is one tribe that may do this, this is shad, it's odd, and we're not going to take it as a general rule and apply it to all the Arabic language. So my point here is that this shows us the concept of the scholar of Basra would take examples, and then they would verify that this example is used by the majority of the Arabs that are Fusaha, that are, still speaking the original Arabic language, if they find that the majority of the Arabic tribes say it this way, or at least a specific amount that they chose that are known to be very pure in their tongue, then if they see that they all say it this way, then they would do a qiyas of that. They take that as an analogy and say that this is how you're supposed to say this, or this is how you should say this. So they're very prescriptive. They're very prescriptive, saying that they're prescribing rulings. They're prescribing how things should be said based on what the Arabs, the majority of them, said. Even though there may be certain tribes that are still, original Arabic tribes, if you will, even though they may say they may say in a slightly different way, that's not what the majority does, and that's not what we're going to take our qiyas, our analogy, and our general rule from. So this is a historical anecdote that shows you how the school of Basra would function. Now, let's go on to the school of Kufa, Ahlul Kufa, which is called the descriptive school if you want. Now, the science of grammar started being studied in Kufa about 100 years after the school of Basra. So the school of Kufa is actually based on the school of Basra to a certain extent. The school of Kufa, which is another city that's a bit higher than Basra that we saw on the map. The school of Kufa, it started studying grammar about 100 years after it was already being studied in Basra. And a lot of what the Kufiyun founded and a lot of their rules are actually just based on the school of Basra. But they added on to what the school of Basra did, and they, as we're going to see, had certain differences and a certain different approach to how they were going to study grammar. Now, it started with scholars like Yunus ibn Habib, who's the one who actually asked the question that we just saw. Also Mu'adh ibn al-Hara, also Ali ibn Hamza al-Kisa'i, Imam al-Kisa'i, we have a recitation named after him, of course. There's Yahya ibn Ziyad al-Farra, a great scholar al-Farra. Then we have Ahmed ibn Yahya al-Tha'rab. So both these scholars, these three last scholars here are definitely names that you should remember. Imam Kisa'i, of course, al-Farra, Yahya ibn Ziyad, and also al-Tha'rab. So how did this start? So the city of Kufa was a center for the science of qira'at and fiqh. That's what they were really studying. So, in the school of Basra, they were studying grammar, for 100 years. So what was the school of Kufa doing? They were really focusing on qira'at and fiqh and so on and so forth. With great reciters like Imam al-Kisai, of course, right? Now, Imam al-Kisai is really the one who's considered as having founded the school of Kufa. Even though there are other scholars that came before him, as we saw, he's really the one that's considered to be the founder of the school of Kufa. Just like as you can say, even though there's scholars that came before Sibawayh, he's still remembered to be really the main scholar of the school of Basra. So Imam Kisai, what's special about him? How was he? How did he start studying school? How did he start really the school of Kufa and start studying grammar? Well, Imam Kisai, he realized that to perfect his knowledge of qira'at, because Imam Kisai, of course, he was a reciter of the Quran, that's what he's remembered for, usually. But he realized that to perfect his knowledge of qira'at, the different recitations of the Quran, he needed to master the Arabic language. So his goal was to study, document, and describe the different dialects of the Arabs, because the different qira'at, in reality, just, according to different Arabic tribes to a certain extent. So his goal, was to study and document and describe different dialects of the Arabs so that he better understand the different qira'at and where they come from to a certain extent. So not to lay down strict grammar rules like the school of Basra. So the school of Kufa, their goal was not necessarily, at least Imam Kisani, was not so much to really lay strict rules of grammar, because the rules of grammar to a very big extent was already laid down, those 100 years before. But they wanted to further enhance and to further document the speech of the Arabs. Okay, so that is, the different approach where it comes from. Now, how is Ahl al-Kufa different from Ahl al-Basra? Now that we understood that Ahl al-Kufa, to a very big extent, was just a continuation, in a sense, or was building its work, if you will, on the school of Basra, what's really the difference between the two? The difference between the two can really be broken down to three. First and foremost, al-ittisa' fi riwayat. So the school of Kufa is different from the school of Basra in the sense that they're more expansive in narrating from the speech of the Arabs. So for example, this is just an example. The school of Basra, they may have said, we're going to take and we're going to use as our proof and we're going to derive rule from the speech of 50 Arab tribes or 10 Arab tribes or 20 Arab tribes. Again, this is not the real numbers, it's just an example. So we're going to say, we're going to take our speech from these 20 different Arab tribes that are known to be the most eloquent and the most pure in their speech. The school of Kufa did not do this. They said we're going to take it from a much bigger pool of Arabs. So they went to even some tribes that had mixed with non-Arabs, and they also took their speech and they also documented their speech. So they're a lot more broad and a lot more expansive in narrowing speech from Arabs than the school of Busa, which was a lot more, following strict rules and only taking their speech from the tribes that they deemed to be very, very pure in their speech. That's the first difference. Second difference, al-ittisā' fil qiyās. They're a more expansive analogy. So from that bigger pool that they take, they'd also be more expansive in deriving rules. So their approach in their school is a lot less التقعيد, really laying down firm, clear rules. They're a bit more lax with that. They're a bit more relaxed with that. And that's why you'll see, for example, in the school of Kufa, there are a lot more huruf and nasab. The huruf and nasab are a lot more than the school of Basra. And so on and so forth. المخالفة في المصطلحات. The third difference is the differences in terminology. The differences in terminology. So the school of Kufa would refer to certain things like this in the mubtada and like this and fa'al, for example, and other words, other terminology that we use. They use certain different types of terminology. We're going to see some examples for this. So let's see some examples for the first one. Ittisāf riwayat. We have a statement from Abu Fadl al-Riyashi, who is a great scholar of Basra. Abu Fadl al-Riyashi was a great scholar of Basra. He says, نحو نأخذ لغة عن حرشات الضباب وأكلة يرابيع وأنتم تأخذونها عن أكلة الشواريز وباعة كواميخ. And this, a lot of the information is taken from Kitab al-Madaris al-Nahwiyya. So Abu Fadl al-Riyashi, he's pretty much, dissing the school of Basra by saying that we, the school of Basra, the Basriyun, we take the language from the hunters of leopards, lizards, and geopores, or gerbois. You, Kufans, the people of Kufa, take it from the eaters of yogurt and pickles. What does this mean? What's meant here is Abu Fadl al-Riyashi was pretty much saying, when we take our language, we take it from the tribes that live in the desert, the tribes that haven't mixed with non-Arabs, the tribes that still eat the lizards and the gerbois, which are, the things that the Arabs that were really living in the desert would eat, right? So the tribes that are still very much close to their natural culture and their natural way of life, and they haven't mixed with the non-Arabs. They haven't mixed with the Persians and with the Romans and so on and so forth. Well, the Kufans, the Ahlul Kufa, the Kufiyun, because they're more expansive in taking their riwayat, because they're more expansive in who they take their narrations from, they would take it from, Arabs that lived in city centers, that would eat yogurt and pickles, which weren't necessarily foods that the Arabs were used to. So pretty much he's saying that you Kufans would take the knowledge and would take riwayat, would take speech from Arab tribes that have mixed a lot with non-Arabs, that their speech is maybe not as pure and not as unfiltered unfiltered to a sense, yes, than the speech of the Arabs that are living in the desert. This is an example of different approaches. The second thing we talked about was الاتساف والقياس. So نقل السيوطي عن ابن درستوي في بغياء الوعاء. Imam Suyuti, the great scholar, he mentions from Ibn Dastawi. Ibn Darastawi was a great scholar of Basra also. Ibn Darastawi was also a great scholar of Basra. And he says, كان الكساء يسمع الشهادة الذي لا يجوز إلا في الضرورة فيجعله أصلا ويقيس عليه فأفصل بذلك النحو. Now, Ibn Darastawi here is being a bit harsh, but what he's saying here is that Kisai, Imam Kisai, the great scholar that started the school of Kufa, he used to listen to speech that was odd. He used to listen to the speech of the Arabs that were odd. They weren't necessarily what the most of the pure Arabs used to say. But he still listened to his speech. He still documented this speech, even though he shouldn't have really been doing that, because you shouldn't use that speech except for in this sphere, according to Ibn Darastawi. And he would take from this speech that may be a bit odd, it may not be the normal case, and he'd make it an actual rule. And he'd do analogy with it. And he says that with that, and this is where he's being a bit harsh, he says that by doing that, he pretty much corrupted the science of grammar. By doing that, he pretty much corrupted the science of grammar. Now, this is a bit harsh, and I wouldn't say this is entirely right. Because Kisai did add, and the school of Kufa, as we're going to study, did add a lot and did have a big contribution to the study of grammar, and their contributions did enhance the understanding of Nahu. But that being said, you will find that the school of Kufa are a lot more relaxed. Okay, and sometimes they take speech that is odd, speech that doesn't go with the majority, but they still take and make it an actual rule. Okay, and this is what's meant here by al-ittisaf and qiyas. Now, thirdly, the third difference is al-mukhalatu fi al-mustalahat, right? They had different mustalahat, they had different terminology. So the school of Basra, they'd say ismu fa'al, which is what we use today, right? Ism fa'al. At-tamyiz, which is also what we use today, right? As-sifa, which is not what we use today, right? Usually today we say what? An-na'at. Usually we say an-na'at. So at the school of Kufa, instead of saying as-sifa, they say an-na'at. The school of Basra, instead of saying at-tafsir, they say at-tamyiz. But Ahl Kufa would say at-tafsir. So they refer to example, Ja Muhammadun al-Kabiru. They say al-Kabiru tafsir. Or sorry, they say al-Kabiru na'at. But the school of Basra, they say Ja Muhammad al-Kabir, they say al-Kabir as-sifa. But for example, for tamyiz, if I say يعني إني رأيت 11 كوكبا, al-kawkaban or kawkaban, Ahl Kufa, Ahl Basra would say tamyiz, right? Ahl Kufa, they refer to kawkaban here as a tafsir. Another example, ism fa'al. So Ahl Kufa referred to ism fa'al as al-fi'lu da'im. Al-fi'lu da'im. So obviously, usually we go to the terminology of Ahl Basra, but as you can say, for example, a sifa and a na'at, usually nowadays we go a na'at wal man'ut. So this is an example where Ahl Kufa, certain terminology of Kufa we still use today, but the majority we take it from Ahl Basra. So this is an example of al-mukhalafatu fi al-mustalahat. Now the final question is, which school do we follow today? Now that we understood the historical development between the school of Basra and the school of Kufa, we just covered obviously the differences between the two schools. Now, when we're studying books like Qatar al-Nada, when we're studying books like Alfiyat al-Malik, his book At-Tasheel, when we're studying these books that we usually study in Nahu, which school are we following? What is the school that's being followed? Today, we study a mix of both schools, mostly based on the school of Basra, though, with the opinions of Ibn Malik, right, his Alfiya, and Ibn Hisham, Qatar al-Nada, and other great books. So this is really what we study today, because when the school of Basra and the school of Kufa, they were fighting and they were fighting with each other to a sense when it came to grammar. But in the end, what happened is that when Baghdad became Baghdad, the great center of learning, both the students of the school of Basra and the school of Kufa, they all moved to Baghdad, or a lot of them, all the big shots, if you will, quote unquote, they all moved to Baghdad. And when they're in Baghdad, the students of Baghdad, they took from both schools, because they were both there, both the great scholars were there. And then after that, I mean, there wasn't anything, no one could be called a Kufi in this instance, a Basri. So nowadays, you won't find someone that says, oh, I'm a Kufi in grammar, or I'm a Basri in grammar. No, because both schools mixed in Baghdad. And after that, we study a mixed match of both schools, because at the end of the day, as we covered, most of the opinions are the school of Basra, because they're the ones who really found the science, and Ahl Kufa built on that. But of course, we followed the opinions of Ibn Malik and Ibn Hisham, because these were two great scholars that came later, which are really referred to as al-muhaqqiqun al-nahu. They really came and verified and added a lot to grammar, and they added their own opinion. So Ibn Malik in Zalfiyah sometimes going to take the opinion of Ahl Kufa, sometimes going to take mostly the opinion of Ahl Basra, and sometimes going to come with his own resolutions or his own deductions and his own opinions. Ibn Hisham, of course, also. So this is really what we study. This is the school that we study today, if you will. A mixture of both, based mostly on the school of Basra with the opinions of Ibn Hisham and Ibn Malik, who were, really the two great later scholars of Nahu to a certain extent. So I hope this video was beneficial. I hope it solved or it addressed the three questions.